I'm certainly I'm thrilled that Black Phone is out on DVD. It's still in theaters right now. It had another great weekend. It's the little movie that could. It's just chugged along week after week. It reminds me a little bit of The Greatest Showman. When The Greatest Showman came out, The Greatest Showman was never number one. It was never had a single weekend where it owned the top slot in the movie theaters. It just hung around week after week after week. People kept going to see it and having fun and, deciding they wanted to see it again and dragging friends in. And I think, in some ways, that's almost the best success, the kind of thing where it just sort of continues to roll. And the people who have seen it and enjoyed it were so enthusiastic that they want to see it a second time in the theaters. They want to drag some friends to see it. That's really what you hope for.
Yeah, well, the response, as you said, over the summer has been great. And obviously, as you said, it's coming on to Blu-ray and streaming now. But I am curious, obviously, it's been 2 decades for you since you sat down to write this. So when talk of a film adaptation did come up, were you surprised, or was this something that's been in the works for a while and has just been taking its time to come to fruition?
I was paid. I couldn't sell the story, and none of the magazines in America that I sent it to were interested. I sold the Black Phone to the Third Alternative over in the United Kingdom for £35 in 2004, and I'm not completely sure I ever got the check. It might have been a theoretical £35. I was tremendously proud to have the story published. It was, I think, my second story that I sold to Andy Cox at the Third Alternative. And, never in my wildest dreams did I imagine someday it was going to be, a hugely successful hit film. What a trip. It was in development for a while with Scott Derrickson and C. Robert Cargill, who were both friends of mine, and who, they are constant collaborators, but in a weird way, I kind of got to know them separately. I met C. Robert Cargill in London at a fantasy book festival. And, he says it was inevitable we were going to meet and that we were going to be friends because we have similar temperaments, a shared frame of reference, and we're publishing, genre fiction at the same time, and had this kind of overlapping Venn diagram of friends, mutual friends. And then I found this on the web. No, thank you. And then Siri was contributing something to the conversation. And then I forget exactly, maybe Cargill introduced me to Scott, but I got to know Scott Derrickson when for a time it seemed he would direct the pilot of Lock and Key. Lock and Key was being developed by Carlton Cuse for Hulu at that time. I had written the pilot script, and Scott was on the hook to direct, and he was very excited to do that. And then a variety of conflicts arose and dragged him away from the window. There was a narrow window to make the pilot, and he simply couldn't do it. So it wound up that we missed this opportunity to collaborate on something together. And the Black Phone was kind of our makeup call.
Yeah, well, it's great to see how things come around like that. And of course, you mentioned Scott and C. Robert there, and they did a great job with this film. But when it comes to obviously handing your work over like that, do you still like to have creative involvement in a project like this? Or do you trust in a team like that to take what you've done and just run with it?
I think it depends on the project. And the creators involved. That there's no, I don't have any standard operating procedure that it changes from, one project to another. In the case of the Black Phone, I felt very included, although I didn't do any writing on it, but I felt like from the very start, when I saw the first draft of their screenplay, I was completely blown away. I thought, wow, this is so great. It would be amazing if this got made. I loved how faithful it was. Every scene in the short story was there in the screenplay, but then it had become so much more because Scott had expanded it out. He had expanded it out to be an autobiographical story about growing up in the violent, dirty 70s in North Denver. And Cargill had also introduced some aspects that were very C. Robert Cargellian, if I can say that, in the sense of, in the short story, Finney is trapped in the basement of this serial killer, and there's a black antique phone down there, disconnected phone, and he begins to get calls from one of the other dead victims. But in the movie, he gets calls from multiple victims. He hears from several different ghosts, and it becomes an almost escape the room type structure, with each ghost offering him a different piece of advice. And that's very Cargill, the puzzling out of, I'll use this, that didn't work. I'll use this, no, that didn't work. But wait, maybe these two things can fit together and that will do something. So that's great. The other thing I was going to say, which is sort of relates but is a little tangential, when I wrote The Black Phone, I was a failed novelist. I had written 4 novels I couldn't sell to save my life. And I'd mostly given up on novels. I had figured out how to write a good short story. I had figured out how to write short stories that I could sell. And I began to work on a collection of stories, thinking, well, I didn't have a novel in me, but maybe I have a book of short stories. And a funny thing happened as the collection came close to being complete, which is that short stories started trying to turn into novels on me. So The Black Phone actually wanted to be a novel, and at one point there was a 50 or 60-page version of it. But because I had these other novels rejected, I had written and failed to sell 4 novels, I didn't have the confidence that I could write a novel. And so I rejected the possibility of going. I could see the novel, I could see the shape it would have, but I rejected the possibility of going forward on it because I knew I could sell a short story, and I knew I could pull a short story off, and I didn't know if I could pull the novel off. And so one of the great pleasures for me of the film is that 15 years later, I finally get to have the novel version of the story. It fell to Cargill and Scott Derrickson to do the novel version of the story, but they delivered and it was great.
Yeah, well, for sure. And when a film like this does come out, and obviously, as you said, you've almost seen an expanded version of your short story, does it ever tempt you to maybe go back to a world like this of The Black Phone and maybe turn it into a novel, whether it be an expansion of your original story, a prequel, sequel, or anything like that?
No, I mean, I think there might be, the short story is what it is, and there's no reason to return or expand on it. As far as the movie goes, there's a few factors there. I think there are a couple avenues to writing a really satisfying second Black Phone film. That there is a possibility of a non-sucky sequel. And Scott and Cargill and I have talked about what that movie might look like. So that could, and I do think that this is unique to the horror genre, and everyone who covers the horror genre knows this. When you do have a sufficiently big hit, there is a feeling like now there should be a sequel. We want to see that scary guy in the mask again. Dracula, Frankenstein, the Wolfman, Jason, Freddy, none of these people stay buried. The grabber may yet claw his way out from under the dirt and return to haunt cinemas at some point. We'll see. If Scott and Cargill can come up, or if all 3 of us can come up with a good idea, and it feels like it wouldn't cheapen what came before, that might happen.
I'd love to see it. And just one final quick question for you, Joe.
Sure.
Limited on time, but you mentioned the mask there and obviously the grabber. What's it been like for you to see that mask so quickly achieve iconic status, and obviously to have an actor like Ethan Hawke behind it, bringing your character to life?
Well, Ethan was absolutely extraordinary. It was a really remarkable performance, and I'm so glad, it was daring and nothing he's ever done before. And I'm so glad that the film was a big hit, because in a way that honors his, his courage and his artistic mettle. If you want to know why I think there's a pretty good chance there'll be a sequel, it's the mask. It really is. Sometimes things are complicated, sometimes things are simple. I mean, in this case, The Mask, which was designed by Jason Baker and Tom Savini, is extraordinary and terrifying. It's the kind of thing, that comes back to haunt you in your sleep at 2 a.m. And I think, when you have such an iconic visual like that in the horror genre, we want to see it again. We want more. Pretty thrilling, pretty wild.
Absolutely. Well, fingers crossed on that front. Joe, thank you so much for your time. I had a blast with this movie. So great to see an author's work brought to the screen in such a, faithful and just fantastic way. So can't wait to see what else might follow. And like you said, fingers crossed for a sequel.
Absolutely. Josh, thank you so much. It was great talking to you.
Thanks, Joe. Hope to speak to you again.